Hello, I'm Dr. Tony Simion, and I will be discussing how we determine that the chemicals in your cosmetic products, otherwise known as ingredients, are safe for that purpose. This presentation is based on my experience of more than 25 years working in the cosmetics and personal care industries, with responsibilities primarily in North America and Europe. Are you asking, why should one care about cosmetic ingredient safety? As a formulator, you may wonder why product safety wants so much information. Everyone is using ingredient X and knows that it is safe. You've probably had brand management or finance ask, why are we spending so much money and time on reformulation? My aim in this presentation is to answer many of those questions. We all want our products to be safe and to delight consumers. If the product causes irritation, an allergic reaction, or must be recalled from the marketplace, it will fail to deliver on what our consumers expect. In most cosmetic products, ingredients do not chemically react with each other, and if they are stable, there are no decomposition products. Therefore, the safety profile of the product is based on the profile of all the raw materials that you add, the main ingredients, the minor components, and the contaminants. So, what am I going to talk about today? First, I will discuss some of the laws and regulations that impact cosmetics and their ingredients in the US, Canada, and the EU. Then I will compare hazard avoidance and risk assessment, focusing on the differences between these approaches to cosmetic safety. Focusing on risk assessment, I will discuss some of the main elements and how to find the needed information. My presentation will primarily focus on the US, but I will talk some about both Canada and the EU. A key point to remember is that the companies making and selling cosmetic products are responsible for the safety of those products, regardless of whether you're in the US, Canada, or the EU. In the US, cosmetic products are regulated at both the federal and the state level. The US Federal Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, regulates cosmetics based on the Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act that goes back to 1938. Cosmetics cannot be adulterated, which means they cannot contain poisonous or deleterious substances. However, the US federal laws and regulations have only banned a few ingredients, such as vinyl chlorides, some sources of potential mad cow disease or similar infections, and microbeads. Therefore, responsibility for safety of other ingredients added to cosmetics is based firmly on the manufacturer and brand owner's shoulders. There are federal laws regulating chemical safety in the US. These are the Toxic Substances Control Act, TSCA, and its 2015 update, the Frank-Lautenberg Law. However, they do not apply to cosmetic ingredients. There are also regulations at the US state levels that affect cosmetics. These include California Proposition 65, which relates to carcinogens and reproductive toxicants in most products, including cosmetics and OTC drugs. New York State has also introduced restrictions on 1,4-dioxane, which is a contaminant in ethoxylated ingredients. There are special laws that apply to children's products in Minnesota and Washington State. Finally, there are emerging bans on organic sunscreen actives in places like Maui. However, this ban relates to environmental rather than human safety. Additionally, it should be noted that sunscreens are regulated as drugs in the US. The EU's regulatory situation is very different to that of the US. What is banned and restricted in the most part is explicitly spelled out. The chemical law REACH applies to cosmetic ingredients and includes both environmental and human safety endpoints. For environmental concerns, these include cyclomethicone, such as D5, and future restrictions of microplastics. For human safety, the European Chemicals Authority, ECHA, has classified the fragrance ingredient Lilial as a reproductive toxin. Hence, it is banned under REACH. Many of ECHA's restrictions, and especially bans, must be translated into the cosmetic regulations. The cosmetic regulations contain Annex 2, which lists which ingredients are banned from cosmetics, and Annex 3, which sets maximum concentrations for ingredients in specific product types or uses. There are additional annexes relating to colorants, preservatives, and sunscreens, which may further limit the use concentrations of these ingredients. Canada combines many features of the US and EU approaches. The Food and Drug Act, which enables Health Canada to regulate cosmetics, includes a similar ban on adulterated products to the US. Additionally, it includes a provision for the hot list regulations. This enables Canada to ban use of an ingredient in a cosmetic or limit the level at which it may be used. In this way, the hot list is similar to the EU's Annexes 2 and 3. There are two main approaches to cosmetic ingredient safety. First is hazard identification and avoidance. Second is risk assessment. Does the hazard pose a risk to consumers? If yes, how to minimize and manage it? So, what is hazard avoidance? Basically, if there's a potential for harm, then that ingredient should be avoided. It should be remembered that there is a wide spectrum of potential harm, ranging from the mild, such as sensory irritation, to the serious, such as carcinogenicity. Presumably, you will not treat the two extremes the same way. It is easy to rapidly communicate the hazard avoidance approach. This ingredient is dangerous. We don't want it in our cosmetics. The downside of this approach is that many useful ingredients that could be used at low levels and with safeguards must be discarded. The first step in risk assessment is the same as hazard avoidance. Is there a hazard, potential for harm, associated with the ingredient? But then we look at two other questions. Is there a concentration at which the chemical has no effect? This is the dose response. And do we know how consumers will use this chemical, how much, and how will they use it? Based on the answers we get, we can estimate the incidence of health effects on the various exposure conditions. This is called risk characterization. As this approach, risk assessment, is more complex, it is also more difficult to explain, especially to a large audience, than compared with hazard avoidance. However, many useful ingredients can still be used at safe levels in the appropriate products. Our personal cars are a great way of illustrating the differences between hazard avoidance and risk assessment. We know the hazard associated with our cars. These are the chances of getting in an accident and being injured or worse, and pollution, damage to the environment. If we take a hazard avoidance approach, we can travel by train or bus. In both, we have a much lower chance of getting into an accident. Also, for each passenger, trains and buses are far less polluting than cars. However, buses and trains have specific schedules and follow defined routes. You cannot necessarily go where you want, when you want. If you want to keep your personal car, then you can reduce your risk by driving a sedan within the speed limit rather than driving a race car fast. If you want to reduce the amount of pollution generated by your car, electric cars are available. Apart from the freedom of being able to go where you want, when you want, you can also carry as much luggage as you want. Most laws relating to cosmetic ingredient safety are based on risk assessment rather than hazard avoidance. In risk assessment, whether a product can be safely used is based on what chemicals are in the product, what is actually in the bottle. Each raw material may contain several different chemicals, the main ingredients that enable the product to deliver its benefits, minor ingredients such as preservatives and antioxidants, and finally contaminants. All must be accounted for. How is the product used? Is it used on the skin or the hair, on the lips where it can be ingested, or as a spray where it can be inhaled? Most of the chemicals in a rinse-off product are washed down the sink. Additionally, it's important to know how much product and therefore how much of each chemical is used in each product type. Such information is available in publications from the trade associations, PCPC in the US and Cosmetics Europe in the EU. Finally, who is the product and its ingredients being used on? A baby weighs a lot less than an adult, so the amount that can be safely used on a baby is much lower. A cosmetic product is usually made up of many different raw materials, each one containing many different chemicals, ingredients. These include the main ingredients that provide the raw material's function, minor ingredients such as preservatives and antioxidants, and non-functional ingredients that may be byproducts of the ingredient synthesis or unreacted raw materials. The minor functional and non-functional ingredients frequently vary depending on the manufacturer. A great example of this is cocamidopropylbetadine, otherwise known as cat baiting. Indeed, it is the third ingredient on the ingredient statement shown, even though it's a little hard to see. The actual cat baiting may only be between 30 and 46% of the total. Often, cat baiting also contains a preservative. Benzoic acid and diadantoin have been used. However, other manufacturers don't use any preservative at all. Since preservatives can have such a large impact on cosmetic product safety, they, together with sunscreens and fragrances, will be discussed by others in more detail later this afternoon. What non-functional ingredients are present also varies between manufacturers. They can include sodium chloride and glycerin, but also amidoamine and DMAPA, both of which are sensitizers. Additionally, there is the possibility of dichloroacetic acid, formaldehyde, and methanol. The level of these last three must be strictly controlled, as they are listed chemicals under Proposition 65. Human toxicity endpoints. I know that this is a long list, but don't worry. There is no pop quiz at the end of the presentation. This list shows that there are many possible types of health effects that a chemical may have on the human body. These range from the mild, such as sensory irritation, the tightness and dryness you feel when you wash your face with soap, to serious effects, such as carcinogenesis and reproductive toxicity. It is important for toxicologists to review the safety information for each ingredient in the raw material regardless of whether it's a major or minor component, or a functional or non-functional chemical. In the last few years, many jurisdictions around the world have passed animal testing bans for cosmetics and cosmetic ingredients. This may not be a great issue for chemicals already in our inventory, but it may greatly affect newly developed chemicals or those not previously used for cosmetics. So, how do we navigate the world where animal testing bans are ubiquitous? Where do we get the safety data on ingredients? It is important to work with an experienced toxicologist. Much of the data you need is out there, but it may not be easy to apply to your new product. Many of the new cosmetic products that you develop are based on products already in the marketplace. Therefore, information should be available to you from your previous products and the ingredients in them. This applies to both pre-launch data for ingredients and products, as well as for your experience with in-market surveillance. It is important to get data on the exact composition of each new raw material that you're using, not only the primary ingredients, but the minor ingredients, whether they are functional or non-functional. Raw material suppliers are the best source, as they should have information on all the chemicals present. There are many sources of toxicological information on different chemicals. A lot of them have data from animal studies. However, studies that were run before the animal testing bans were imposed can still be used in safety assessments of cosmetic products. Sources of information include regulatory authorities. These can include databases that contain test results associated with the EU's chemical law REACH, or reviews such as Australia's NICNAS. Additionally, some regulatory authorities set maximum levels of ingredients that can be used based on their risk assessment of the available data. In these cases, the regulatory authorities have done the work for you in setting up maximum levels of a chemical. Examples include Health Canada for the hot list, the EU Commission for Annexes 2 and 3 of the cosmetic regulations, and in California, OEHA sets threshold values for some chemicals listed under Proposition 65. There are expert panels that review the data available for different chemicals and recommend maximum use levels, as well as where a chemical should or should not be used in cosmetics. Such expert panels include, in the US, the Cosmetics Ingredient Review, CIR, RIFM, which reviews safety data for fragrance ingredients and is the basis for the fragrance industry's code of conduct. In Europe, the SSCS advises the EU Commission on the safe level and use of cosmetic ingredients. There is a lot of data available in the scientific literature. However, determining how to apply it to risk assessments may take a level of expertise. There are threshold approaches that I will discuss later. And finally, you can generate new data, but remember the animal testing ban. As I've talked about before, minor ingredients can have a large impact on the safety of a cosmetic raw material. Sometimes information on these minor ingredients is difficult to obtain from a supplier. They will tell you, our product doesn't contain any contaminants. This is often not completely accurate. There are certain contaminants and other minor ingredients that are characteristic of different classes of cosmetic raw material. These include 1,4-dioxane and ethylene oxide in ethoxylated surfactants, plant extracts which often contain pesticides and heavy metals. Alpha olefin sulfonate may contain saltones. Diethanolamines can often contain nitrosamines. And most raw materials that contain more than 70% of water will often contain a preservative. There is nothing wrong with pushing the supplier to be more transparent about what is actually in their raw material. What are they supplying to you? Remember, you are the customer. Especially for contaminants and other minor ingredients, if there's not sufficient data, then a threshold approach may be appropriate. A threshold approach assumes that there is a level at which there's so little of the chemical present, it cannot have a harmful effect. Initially, this approach was developed by Monroe and his colleagues for indirect food additives and contaminants in flavors. However, Crowe and his colleagues extended this to cosmetics. They reviewed the dose response for many carcinogens and ingredients that cause systemic effects. With some exceptions, most chemicals can be divided into 3 groups, Kramer's classes 1, 2, and 3. Each class has a separate threshold, below which that chemical will not have a deleterious effect at the 95% confidence level. If exposure to these chemicals in the cosmetics is below the threshold, then it is likely that the chemical that is the contaminant will not be harmful. Of course, legal requirements, such as California Proposition 65, will take precedence over such an approach. Another form of this threshold approach is used in assessing polymers. Most polymers are very large molecules with molecular weights well above 1,000. Hence, it is unlikely that these large molecules can cross the stratum corneum barrier, so will not affect the body. Such a polymer exclusion rule has been used both by the European Chemicals Authority, ECHA, and the US EPA. It is important to remember that most polymers do have monomer residues present, and these must be taken account of. One example is polyacrylamide, which can be contaminated with acrylamide monomers and neurotoxin. The final concentration of the acrylamide in cosmetic products should be kept below 1 ppm, a EU regulation. Other approaches for assessing the safety of cosmetic ingredients, both the main and minor chemicals present, include read-across. This involves comparing the target chemical with other closely related chemicals, preferably similar in both structure and biological effect. Then the data from the second chemical can be applied to the target chemical. An example of this would be looking for data for a C14 fatty acid and finding that there is much more data for the C16 analog. Since the 2 fatty acids are very similar both in structure and biological effect, a lot of the information from the C16 fatty acid can be applied to the C14 fatty acid. In silico. This is the use of computer models to identify potential biological activity associated with the target chemical. Pre-existing toxicological data on chemicals containing similar structures is fed into the computer, which then uses this information to make predictions on the potential hazards associated with a target chemical. The better the pre-existing data supplied to the computer program, the better the prediction. Testing. For chemicals, toxicological testing may be run on new chemicals, but rarely on ones that have been available for a while. There are in vitro predictive tools that can be used to assess the propensity of a chemical to cause some types of adverse reaction. This works best for endpoints such as sensitization and different types of irritation. Currently, there are no good in vitro predictive tools to assess the potential for reproductive or systemic toxicity. In summary, manufacturers, brand owners, and responsible persons are responsible for the cosmetic product's safety. The safety profile of a cosmetic product is dependent on the safety profile of its ingredients. Ingredients should be used at safe levels, and in some jurisdictions, the maximum level for an ingredient's use is defined in the regulations. Ingredients' minor components, such as preservatives and contaminants, will greatly affect the safety profile. The minor components present is highly dependent on the ingredient supplier. Most cosmetic laws require risk assessment to assess ingredient and product safety. There are many endpoints for different effects that an ingredient can have on the human body. Animal testing bans mean that data generated from animal tests after a critical date cannot be used in safety assessments. Information on the toxicology for many endpoints is available from multiple sources online. These include regulators, expert panels, and the scientific literature. Additional non-animal methods include use of thresholds, read-across, in vitro, human, and in silico modeling. Finally, it's highly recommended that you work with an experienced toxicologist. Finally, I would like to thank EchoWell and especially Jan Novakovic for inviting me to speak at this summit on cosmetic safety. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions during the Q&A.